Hello, this is part 2 of the Simpsons Treehouse of Horror ranking. Sorry for having to split it up into 2 parts. There was trouble with YouTube and the spookiness, so I'm going to have to say that this part is very... Apparently, YouTube has said it was so scary that they're not going to even allow us to play it, and instead suggest hit kids song Baby Shark.
Baby shark, do-do-do-do-do, baby shark, do.
There is nothing wrong with your device. Please do not try to adjust your Wi-Fi. For the next 11 minutes, we control what you see and hear. So are you ready for the scariness for every Simpsons Treehouse of Horror ranked part 2? Number 19. Treehouse of Horror 18. The first segment is a completely unnotable Coda segment. There's nothing that separates it from any other Coda segment. 50 out of 100. The second segment is a great creative story of how Homer and Marge's marriage is not working. Why, you ask? Well, because they're both assassins for hire. That's why. Makes perfect sense. The story is amazing, crazy, and hilarious. 76 out of 100. The third segment starts off as a Kids Cause Trouble segment and then became an advertisement for hell. 60 out of 100. Number 18, Treehouse of Horror 14. The opening chase in the first segment was really funny and unique, but the story seemed at first to be a story about a world without death. It turned out to be a story about Homer becoming death, and the conclusion is great as well. 72 out of 100. The second segment is pretty boring for a horror parody. 65 out of 100. The third segment is a seemingly fun, light-hearted segment, but took a pretty boring left turn. It's only a 59 out of 100. Number 17, Treehouse of Horror 11. First segment is a pretty standard one chance of redemption story, and it makes Homer out to be useless and annoying. It makes it seem like Homer's incapable of doing something good, when that's just not the case. And when he does do a good deed, he gets sent to hell anyway because, and get this, they weren't looking. That's how Homer gets sent to hell. After everything he's done, it all doesn't matter. He saves a baby, and that apparently doesn't count because St. Peter didn't see it. This is just a pretty bad episode. Overall a 40 out of 100. The second segment is a fun mix of fairy tales with Simpsons characters. It's a pretty comedically dark episode, but it's done pretty well, so ultimately works out in the episode's favour. The third segment is a pretty great parody of Free Willy, where the dolphin that gets freed starts a rebellion over all humans. It's an amazing plot carried out excellently. Number 26. Treehouse of Horror 25. The first segment is a story about how Bart goes to hell, and instead of just escaping, he gets success in the school. It's a surprisingly feel-good story for what it is. 72 out of 100. The second segment is a parody of Clockwork Orange. Maybe I'll get the references if I actually see the things they reference. 60 out of 100. The third segment is a fun return to the original Simpsons. The jokes aren't amazing and the story is pretty boring, but the segment is still pretty entertaining. Number 15, Treehouse of Horror 19. The first segment is a great parody of Transformers. The fact that it's Marge that puts this battle to rest with a sensible conversation is amazing. 60 out of 100. The second segment is another great parody, this time of James Bond. Or at least I think it is. All I know is that the opening looks like it came out of a James Bond film. But the plot is, well, Homer was approached by some advertisers and is given the job of killing celebrities. And if the plot couldn't get more crazy, the dead celebrities come back from the grave to enforce copyright law. It's a great episode and overall a 78 out of 100. The third segment is, again, a parody of The Peanuts. I think. It's hard to tell. In some places it's a parody, in others not really. It's a pretty standard story, but when the highlight is that the big evil monster is racist, you know you've made something really lackluster. Number 14, Treehouse of Horror 10. This segment is a funny, off-the-wall segment for the most part, but Homer is a bit too unlikable in this, and he doesn't really have enough stupid energy to make it comedic. It's overall a 70 out of 100. The second segment is a pretty boring segment. The villain is really boring. Bart and Lisa's Stretch Dude and Clobber Girl don't really work as a duo, and it's real wasted potential. 62 out of 100. The third segment is a fun story where the worst case scenario of the new millennium is created by Homer. It's a pretty good story that hasn't aged particularly well though. 68 out of 100. Number 13, Treehouse of Horror 27. The first segment is a parody of the Hunger Games, where after that the rain comes, there's a massive flooding in Springfield, the flooding freezes over and Ralph becomes a god. It's creative, I'll give it that much. The second segment is a story about a murderous imaginary friend. Again, it's creative, but not great. 59 out of 100. The third segment is a parody of James Bond, where it's revealed that Moe is the head of a secret organisation and Homer is the twist villain. The fact that the show managed to churn out 600 episodes at that point and still make great segments show that even today, The Simpsons still has its charm. 82 out of 100. Number 12, Treehouse of Horror 26. First segment is the story of Sideshow Bob killing Bart. I feel remorse if he hadn't previously tried to kill people on multiple occasions, and I simply can't hate Sideshow Bob. And the fact that Sideshow Bob brings Bart back to life because killing him is the only thing that gave his life meaning is really a great idea. 81 out of 100. The second segment is a parody of old Japanese films, then a parody of Michael Bay films. It's pretty good for what it is, that being Modern Simpsons. 68 out of 100. The third segment is the story of the main kids getting powers. Milhouse goes mad with the powers and gets stopped by Maggie. The end. 60 out of 100. Number 11. Treehouse of Horror 16. The first segment is an AI parody that's much better than the original film. It's really creative, although it flanderises Bart to oblivion. 71 out of 100. The second segment is the usual cannibalism story. It's nothing new and it brings nothing new to it, except the World Series of Manslaughter. That was cool. 65 out of 100. Third segment is an enjoyable Halloween story. The ending isn't that great, but it's a fun segment. Number 10, Treehouse of Horror 7. The episode's first segment is pretty boring. It's just an ordinary, inanimate thing comes to life story, and the song isn't even that catchy. It's alright though. 62 out of 100. The second segment brings up an interesting mystery. The story of how Willie died is really entertaining. The final showdown between Willie and Bart is really original and entertaining. 73 out of 100. The third segment is really cool and new, but it must have been odd when it was released. Considering that this was released 2 whole months before Toy Story, this wasn't much good as the Treehouse of Horror segment, but more an exploration of 3D animation and the technology they now had. And as that, it was pretty cool. 75 out of 100. Number 9, Treehouse of Horror 15. The opening title sequence was a fun sitcom parody. I would watch Keeping It Kodos. The first segment is a fun, wacky story about Ned Flanders predicting the future. Homer's a bit egotistical in this one, but it's still a pretty great segment. 71 out of 100. The second segment is really great telling of a Sherlock Holmes story. The twist of it being the inspector was obvious. He wasn't as nearly good villain as Kodos and Kang, even if they just got a few seconds. 72 out of 100. The third segment is a pretty cool going inside the body journey. It's nothing great, but it's pretty interesting. 76 out of 100. Number 8, Treehouse of Horror 7. The first segment is pretty standard, with an interesting Simpsons twist. 71 out of 100. The second segment is an amazing, creative, fantastic segment about a new world, though it doesn't end all that well. Just ends with Lisa stuck in a tiny world. 80 out of 100. The third segment is an amazing commentary on the American electoral system. There are aliens running for president and it makes the election all the more realistic. Number 7, Treehouse of Horror 3. The first segment is good.
That's good.
Although it's happened tons of times before.
That's bad.
But it ends in a creative way.
That's good.
Although it isn't very realistic.
That's bad.
But it doesn't matter because it's funny.
That's good.
Although it's not that amazing.
That's bad.
But overall it's still a 78 out of 100.
That's good.
The second segment is a fun parody of old black and white films like King Kong. Home makes the best King Kong ever. 77 out of 100. The third segment is a really fun exploration of what it would be like if Springfield got zombies. The cameo of Kodos and Kang were the highlight of the segment, and the dead references are great. 80 out of 100. Number 6, Treehouse of Horror 9. First segment is a fun story about the hair of a dead person controlling a living person, though it ends in such a boring way. You get rid of the hair halfway through battle. Wow. How interesting. Overall, 79 out of 100. Second segment is the usual, what if people entered TV story. That has itself some pretty fun cartoon physics, and the highlight was definitely Poochie's cameo. The third segment is a creative, original story that adds a new element to Marge's character, and the end was pretty good as well. 76 out of 100. Number 5, Treehouse of Horror 8. First segment is a fun, unique, creative story about a bomb shelter. Homer's reaction is great. The twist at the end was unexpected, and it was an overall 82 out of 100. The second segment is seemingly just a usual teleportation story, but then comes a slightly more interesting species swap episode. But this segment doesn't really focus much on the life of a fly. The idea isn't very fleshed out. 78 out of 100. The third segment is a fun 17th century setting, with an unexpected twist of the person people suspected actually being a witch. The character choices are perfect, and the fact that the people gave them the idea of eating the kids. Overall, it's a fun telling of the origins of Halloween. 84 out of 100. Number 4, Treehouse of Horror 2. The first segment perfectly illustrates how everyone feels about The Simpsons nowadays.
At first they were cute and funny, but now they're just annoying.
And also a fun little antimer about how world peace will never work, and also about how the Falklands always belong to the British. 81 out of 100. The second segment is really in line with Bart's character and often hilarious. 84 out of 100. The third segment is an amazing Frankenstein parody, and the end is the best end possible. 86 out of 100. Number 3, Treehouse of Horror 4. There isn't a non-hilarious bone in Ned Satander's body. From Harry's Mr. Burns' 11 o'clock appointment, to to his casual greeting to Bart. Homer's day in hell is just amazing, and the end is brilliant too. 90 out of 100. The second segment is a pretty standard person sees something no one else does but turns out to be right story. It's alright, but it's nothing amazing. 74 out of 100. And the third story is a pretty funny story about vampires. Pretty much every joke lands, but the thing that really shines overall in this segment is the visual comedy. Things like Mr. Burns' shadow are really great, and this segment is an 88 out of 100. Number 2, Treehouse of Horror 1. This is the first Simpsons Treehouse of Horror episode, and boy did it make a good impression. First segment is an extremely creative parody, ending with the classic punchline.
It chose to destroy itself rather than live with us. You can't help but feel a little rejected.
82 out of 100. The second segment is a classic subversion of the usual alien story, even a subversion of a comedy alien story. 85 out of 100. But the third segment, the third segment. This segment may be the best segment of Treehouse of Horror ever. This segment reads from an Edgar Allan poem. Not only is his narration threatening, and Bart as the Raven works really well as well. There aren't many segments of Treehouse of Horror that can manage to straddle the line between the two so well. This segment just left asking, will there be a segment better in episodes 2, 3 or 4? Will there be a better segment? Quote the writers, nevermore. Number 1, Treehouse of Horror 5. Now firstly, I'd like to mention the opening to this episode, and boy what an opening it is. It sets up the scariness by Congress not allowing the episode to be shown at all, when Bart hacks into the show, and Homer goes on with his usual Homer antics, where we get onto the shinning. A hilarious Shining parody. This episode goes on to create the funniest scene in The Simpsons since steamed hams.
I was thinking along the lines of no TV and no beer make Homer something something.
Go crazy?
Don't mind if I do!
Pretty much every joke works to an amazing degree. It's overall a 96 out of 100. The second segment starts off hilariously bonkers. Homer somehow creates a time machine when somehow fixing a toaster that he somehow got into his hand with somehow not knowing it. While I'm tired of the same whole don't change the future time travel plot, this is something the most creative. Homer's watch Jurassic Fly?
Guess what happens next?
You already know it's Treehouse of Horror 5. But Flanders is the unquestioned lord and master of the universe. And Flanders concentration camp, the fact that phrase makes complete sense brightens up my day to no end. It's what you'd expect it to be. Next alternative realities aren't that good, but it's still a great segment. 88 out of 100. The third segment is pretty creative and funny. It goes over the line in pretty much every way, although it's not quite as good as the other two. 82 out of 100. Whether we've got more good episodes, bad episodes, just completely mediocre episodes from Treehouse of Horror, or just The Simpsons in general, I'm still glad to see the show going, even today. If it wasn't for the later seasons, The Simpsons would have just been known as that funny 90s show. But either way, my name is Animation Review, that was my ranking of every Treehouse of Horror ever made. I hope you enjoyed, and I bid you good night.